that we talk about it. And partly because, depending on what areas come up for people and also, how it relates to different things, pre-COVID and post-COVID are very different. And substance use, we've talked about that before too, has during the pandemic risen, and a lot of people relapsed or began addictions or whatnot. So I think, relationships have also changed because of the pandemic, and may have also been obviously affected by the pandemic as well. So I thought maybe, talking about relationships and establishing boundaries, and really when we think about relationships, there's three different levels to it. There's the inside relationship that we have with ourselves, and then there's the relationship we have with other people, and then of course there's the relationship that we have with the world in general. And I think, a lot of times what happens is that when people have shifting boundaries, with themselves, that could be because of insecurities or fears or substance use or uncertainties, anxiety, mental health issues, whatever the case may be, that there's a lack of acceptance or internal validation, that it does cause kind of a shift with how we set up boundaries with other people in the world in general, how we negotiate things in the world. So I kind of want to open it up, to people that are here. Hi, Erica and Linda and Lori. Welcome. Thank you for joining. And just kind of see, what your definition of like a boundary may be. I guess that would be the best way to start off, is talking about what exactly is a boundary. Hi, Allie, welcome.
Hey.
Hey, and just talking about like how do you define a boundary? So we're talking about boundaries and relationships today, like kind of navigating the relationship you have with yourself, with others and the world, and then recognizing how different factors influence that, and also how the pandemic has kind of shifted things too. So I'm curious first, what maybe your definition is of boundaries, and I know what you think that means to you in your world. If anybody wants to share.
When I think of boundaries, I think of, well, of course, there's romantic relationships and there'd be boundaries. But what you feel comfortable with, and feeling pressure sometimes, to maybe it's either going to strengthen or weaken your boundary if you feel some pressure from others. So just in loose terms.
Yeah. So are you like, how are you seeing, like in your life or in your world, what does a boundary look like for you? Like, what does that mean when you set a boundary or you have a boundary? What does that mean?
I think of, value of my time, and,
Uh-huh.
if a relationship takes more time than maybe I'm willing to give it,
Yeah.
um, that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned something, and I apologize. I'm a little fatigued today, so my mind is a little a little not so there. But you mentioned something about a boundary being like what you're comfortable with.
Yes.
Okay. So, I guess my question would be like, how do you see that comfort level with things that you relate to with yourself? And
Hmm. Yeah, that's a very loaded question.
it's a loaded topic. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Okay.
because I guess again it would be what I'm comfortable doing.
Okay.
Um, Not feeling, pressure from outside influences.
Uh-huh.
I'm not really sure how I would define that. That's a good
Okay.
question. Yeah.
Okay. What about, does anybody else want to kind of shoot out a definition they may have for themselves or share?
So for me, a boundary is totally a new thing. It is not something that I understood at all in my life. Honestly, I was really actually taught not to have them. You
Yeah.
show up for whoever needs you, no matter what the cost, and you just power through. But what I'm really learning a boundary is a set of self-imposed rules
Mm.
that help you stay peaceful and functional in your day-to-day life.
Okay,
Um,
wow, that's great.
it's the easiest way I can simplify that, but I mean, it's not something that is, it is a, as human beings go, it sounds good as a definition, but it is not something you can easily apply at all.
Right. It's definitely one of those, trial and error and learning the hard way and how do I navigate this kind of thing? Yeah, it's definitely all of those things. And I appreciate, the sharing, just you being honest about like this is something new for you, right? It's establishing these boundaries and what self-imposed rules, and I think that kind of brings up the question that there are different types of boundaries that we have with ourselves. If like focusing just on the relationship we have with ourselves is like I have some boundaries for myself that I'm willing to be flexible with, right? Like it might involve, when I'm trying to lose weight, which, that's one thing I'm working on and currently and need some boundaries around that. Um, Yet I might have some flexibility with what I choose to eat or how I choose to um, engage with food because I might, be out in a social event or it might be like a treat or I might be able to find a way that I would be okay. That's like something that's come up is like something that you're okay with and it brings you, you don't feel guilty about it, right? Um, so there's these flexible rules that we all have. And then we have rigid rules, and these are like more non-negotiable kind of rules. But then they're also kind of, when we apply it in the boundary world, we're really looking at rules that are very closed. There's no room for people to necessarily come into our world or where we may share with other people, and then we have very loose boundaries. So these might be things that we are still exploring. And Ali, you had mentioned that this might be something that you experienced is just not having boundaries. Like anything was okay. And really just kind of navigating, hey, wait, really that's not okay with me. Um, and so, those are kind of the things that we look at when we're establishing boundaries or kind of to learn ourselves. And I'm curious if anybody has had the experience or, maybe wants to share a little bit of um, how they negotiate boundaries with themselves. Like what's okay for me, what's not okay? Like how do you find a way to establish those things in your life for you? Anybody want to share what their process has been like? I could share mine. So for me, it's been really, and I think, for a lot of people, this may be true. I'm not speaking for everybody, but I know for myself and working with clients and people that I've talked with, sometimes it's, when we have, like I mentioned, I've always been a people pleaser kind of a person. And so boundary setting in certain respects, especially like at work or, sometimes in a relationship, was not something I was very good at establishing. And so I really had to do a lot of reflection and set some boundaries with myself that, what, no, this is not okay with me anymore. Like this is a boundary that I need to set with myself, because if I can't do this for myself, it's very easy for me then to give permission to someone else to do it. Eleanor Roosevelt mentioned something like that. Nobody, what is it? Nobody can make you feel bad without you giving them permission or something. I think she was the one that said that. But anyway, um, so that was one thing that I have learned, in the course of my lifetime is looking at where is it that my stress levels or my anxiety has increased and what is it about this situation that I need to look at. Now, when it comes to relationships, Lori, like what you mentioned is the willingness, and I think there's also some discussion that needs to happen around, because especially when you know yourself as a person, it's going to be okay or not okay for you. And even if you don't, when something new comes up, right, it's something that you're willing to explore with the person that you're committed to, um, and at least maybe come to a compromise or discuss, well, this is not something I'm willing to negotiate. However, maybe then there's like some things that you're not willing to negotiate that I need to be accepting about as well. So, in terms of like a romantic relationship, and Laura, you had brought this up, I'm curious to know, and this is for anybody, what kinds of things in either a romantic relationship or a work relationship or a friendship, have come up where, there's really some kind of, I'm not really sure what to do in this situation.
Well, for me, for instance, one of the big issues is time,
Mm,
because time is valuable, it is an asset. And when I feel a pull for my time, I have to establish some boundaries and say, no, look at, I need X amount of time for myself or for some other things. So
yeah. And do you get like some sort of response when you
oh
actually
yeah,
say no to
yes,
something?
immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately.
And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a very favorable one, or is
Yeah.
it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But
So,
then when I explain it, then, there's usually some understanding that, I
right.
have these commitments or obligations, and that's why.
Yeah. And
So
and so the commitments that you made, these are things that you also want to do and have had
yes,
previous commitments to.
yes, exactly.
It's not like they just popped up into thin air or something.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So is it that, have you found it challenging or uneasy to deal with the reaction of the other person?
Yes, because I too am very much a people pleaser. And so, yeah, it's been very difficult for me, like Allie had mentioned, I really didn't know boundaries before. And so now this is just a new frontier for me. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's difficult to establish that.
Yeah, very much so. That's something that I'm learning too in the workplace, is establishing boundaries about work hours and what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do. And part of it is, I think like what you said, it's you I want to not cause more stress to my system, right? I don't want to feel anxious or stressful or dread something. And I know that when I've established a boundary and I maintain it or I'm okay with it, that it helps me know that I'm doing this because it allows me then later on down the line to say yes to other things. But that's a whole process. Um, I'm curious if anybody else maybe has dealt with kind of quote unquote backlash from other people about establishing boundaries or setting boundaries.
I
Serena, I
definitely,
have a laundry list of those. Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
Hi, who is iPhone?
it's me, Stephanie. How are you?
Stephanie, hi, how are you?
Good. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Yeah, so tell us about your experience with boundaries.
I mean, lately it's been tough. I've been dealing with a lot with my mom, and
Yeah.
I definitely had to put some boundaries down and just kind of like tell the people in my family, like, listen, I'm like overextending myself and I'm drained and I can't do this anymore. I need time just like for myself.
Yeah, yeah,
So like
absolutely.
even I just came back from a pedicure and it was amazing.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Thing, and I forgot my phone at home, and it was probably the best thing because I just got to like veg out and soak it in and just relax. But yeah, it was definitely not favorable. My mom was bitching and complaining, and I thought I would get more backlash from my family, but they kind of understood. My mom is not the easiest person to deal with. So I was like, you know what? I'm taking a couple of steps back. I put forth, whatever I needed to make sure that she was okay and she has her resources set up. But after that, like I can't be her caregiver and her daughter. It's just too stressful.
Yeah. Oh, and that's I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And thank you for sharing that because, boundaries with different roles is absolutely another area that we can explore.
Mhm.
I do want really quickly just to go to Linda. She had her hand up there really quick. Linda, did you have something you wanted to share?
Um, yeah, well, you'd asked the question, so
Yeah.
I want to share a boundary I had to develop.
Mm,
It was 20 plus years ago after I got divorced and got into the dating world and started meeting men. And I really didn't know what boundaries to set at that point, but I learned. And now, and now I've got, I'd say, fairly good boundaries. And so I had to learn boundaries like other people have mentioned, they didn't have any and they had to learn them. And I totally get that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Allie, did you want to say something?
Sure. You know me, I can always talk, Serena.
I know that.
But as I'm putting myself as a people pleaser in recovery, because I'm truly learning that even starting to have boundaries and setting these expectations for myself is just giving me so much more respect for myself, and so many other people around me, they're having more respect for me as well.
Yeah,
I
that's a great
can
point.
literally go through, there's literally not a single part of my life that's not touched. I've had to push a relationship more on the back burner, because right now I'm in a phase of my life I have to focus on myself more. It's not a boundary I like,
Yeah.
but it's one that's important for me because I want to grow and be healthy and be a proper contributing partner in my relationship.
Yeah.
I've had to place boundaries on many of my friendships lately, because I need to make sure that I'm able to sit there and take care of myself, because if I can't take care of myself right now, I can't be the better friend that I want to be when they actually truly need me, not just always being the person who's available. I've had to put boundaries on my daughter, but in this one, I'll just throw out there as a joke, because let's be honest, I can't go use the restroom by myself without a child popping in. Like, I've had to even put boundaries on myself when it comes to enjoying my late night snacks. Oh goodness, brownies and ice cream are delicious, but do we need to do it every single night? I mean, like, the list can go on and on of finding why I would need to place those boundaries, even when they are things I don't like, and even better for the moments when it is something that I do like, because gosh, it feels good to breathe.
Yeah,
It feels great to recharge.
that's such a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could just describe, like, from all the years of me not knowing how important it was for me to have boundaries and how drained I was for so many years, and still am right now, by trying to get myself to recharge and get back to some frame of what should be normal for me. If I would have ever known to do this a lot longer in my life, or let me rephrase that, because I'm a recovering people pleaser, knowing that I had the permission to do it
Yes.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I really actually think that my life would be a lot healthier right now, physically, mentally, emotionally,
Yeah.
by just being able to say it is okay to be able to put me first, and to say that this is not okay with me. So this is where I draw the line.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can ask me anything about boundaries, dear Lord. I could talk for a million stories. I could take the rest of this time, and I wouldn't even want to try to.
Oh, no, I appreciate you sharing that, because it's, and we learn boundaries. This is the thing, is that, we learn boundaries, we start developing boundaries when we're 2 years old. That's when children first say no, right? So they're learning how to establish a boundary. And so oftentimes, and, I tell clients that I work with sometimes, I tell them, like, look, sometimes parents don't have the ability, they don't know the skills, they don't know how to navigate this with their kids because they've never been taught. So it's not about blaming people. It's really about, like what you said, Allie, about taking that responsibility, for yourself, and being able to put forth, the effort and the reflection into what's okay with me, what's going to make me feel like an authentic whole person. I mean, I know that's something that I'm working on too, and I have been working on. I mean, the pandemic really, anyways, that's a whole different boundary that we could talk about. But I think there's truth in that too, in that, oftentimes children don't learn boundaries, or they learn very rigid boundaries. And so then as we grow and we navigate, adolescent age and then adulthood or young adult, we may not have established healthy boundaries. And, we talked about substance use too. And how do you deal with that when young adults are going to school or to college for the first time? And I think part of it is being able to help establish, how do you say no if that's what you want to do, establishing boundaries around what's acceptable and what isn't. You know, and also allowing some flexibility with that. And that's with any relationship, right? It's like, and I, you know, something that somebody mentioned, Lori, I think it was you that talked about, you know, giving more information sometimes explains the context of a boundary that's being set, because oftentimes, you know, when we're told no or someone tells us no, we don't understand necessarily, or they don't understand necessarily the backstory of it. And so I've often found that when I explain a little bit more about the context, like, okay, let me give you a bigger description of all the factors involved in this. You know, so that way a person, and I've usually been met with a deeper understanding and more compassion and an acceptance of the reason of me saying no, or establishing a boundary. And it sounds like, Lori, that's been your experience as well, is that when you kind of give a backstory or a little bit more information, that, okay, I get it. You know, I don't like it, but I get it.
Yeah. And exactly to Allie's point, you have to really, the relationship with yourself comes first, because you can't give to others, you can't give to the world in general until you yourself, you know, you have to have fulfillment yourself. That's most important, recharging yourself.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Important.
Sorry, no, go ahead. Oh,
That's just, I just want to reemphasize Allie's point.
okay. And that was also Stephanie's point too. I mean, that, you know, Stephanie, you had mentioned just kind of learning this and recognizing that, you know, in your role as a daughter and as a caregiver, that there was way too much crossover and too much like overlap. And, you know,
Definitely.
having to just say, hey, look, you know what, I need to take care of myself, and someone else needs to step up here.
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like, okay. So, you know, we kind of, you know, I think if it's, well, see, I'm asking permission here. I think next session, our next podcast, we'll talk about ways to set some boundaries. And, you know, I'd be very interested to hear like how you have approached setting boundaries with people, especially since this is a new thing for a lot of people. And Linda, you had also mentioned, you know, some ways that you had to navigate this as well. But, you know, how have you approached different boundaries? How have you been okay with it? What has helped? You know, I'll share some of my experience, and I'll share what, you know, I've worked on with clients, and some of what it's, you know, what's in the field about healthy relationships. And this is this shameless plug, you know, but I am currently co-authoring a book on relationships and navigating them with a colleague of mine. And this is one of the things that we actually talk about. So I'm really excited, you know, that that this is something that came up, because I think it's a really important thing, especially post-pandemic, when things have really shifted quite a bit for people. And so I don't know if anybody has any kind of last comments they want to make before we close out this episode. Oh no, we got 5 more minutes, so let's keep talking. Oh my goodness, Allie, you said you can keep talking. I don't want to get too deep, because I don't know like how much clinical stuff you want to hear, how much academic stuff you all want to hear. I mean, I could go on and on about my experience, but I'm really interested more in your experiences and, you know, how they may relate to each other, and kind of what you've learned about boundaries in general.
I mean, like if I could say something more
Sure.
about boundaries, it's just I'm learning to fall in love with more with myself because I have set those boundaries.
Okay.
And like, I mean, for me personally, my goal has been to work to foster a better relationship with myself. And I mean, I feel like the more I'm doing that, it's better in my relationships with other people.
Yeah.
But if I can't figure out a way to be able to foster that relationship with myself, I can't do anything for anybody else. I feel like I would be a completely useless human being, which I mean, I know that's not completely true.
Right.
But you know, like that's just how I would feel at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And I want to create more of my thoughts surrounded around my happiness, around my productivity, instead of when I'll use the boundaries as example of this, when I'm not enforcing my boundaries, because we all have some sort of idea of what we like our boundaries to be.
Right.
We're just usually way more flexible with them than we want to. But when I'm not enforcing what my boundaries are, then I'm spending a lot more time thinking. about what happened afterwards. And it's just
Yes.
not where I want to spend my mind going. I think I mentioned this one before. I'd much rather still try to figure out why whales don't have teeth, but fish do. It's just little silly things that just bring me simple joy instead. But it's so much harder to get my mind over to the silly stuff if my mind is wrapped up on what happened, because it really doesn't matter, truthfully, what happened itself. It's more how I felt about it afterwards, because the situation's past, but the feelings.
Absolutely. And, that also kind of speaks to what we talked about last time, was about, you start ruminating about these things, right? Like you have this like mental obsession with replaying the situation and, what did I say or didn't I say, or how did I say it, or why didn't it work out the way I wanted it to, or why didn't this person respond this way, or whatever. It's like when we have these boundaries, like you said, and we're able to follow through with it, because the follow through is really the most important piece. It's very easy to say, oh, I don't want to go to this place, or, I'll go, but there's some conditions. But if we don't follow through with these kinds of things, that also gives too much, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as cemented within our own being. And, the one thing I did want to just mention, it looks like we're wrapping up in a couple minutes, is that it also sounds like that when you make these boundaries with yourself and you have a more deeper connection with people, it's not so superficial. Like you're able then to be okay with yourself. And you mentioned before, like getting respect from people have more respect, when you're establishing boundaries for yourself. They may not like it and they may not want you to keep it. However, they respect the fact that you have these boundaries and are enforcing it. So I think there's a lot of different layers to this that we touched upon. And, I think the one piece that I heard is that for most of you, that when you started setting boundaries with yourself and with others, that you recognize that it felt freer for you. And it gave you a sense of, what, if this is not something that we could like talk about or negotiate, or that you can accept, then that's the way it is. So I don't know if I think we'll end there, because I'm afraid, like, if I get into another part of this topic, that I'm just going to speak on and have you guys talk a little bit more. So Pramila, is that all right with you?
Yeah, absolutely. We can continue the conversations next week and more, because this is there's unending information and discussions to be shared. So we'll definitely meet again in our 9th session 2 weeks from today. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for attending. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Have a
you.
great night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.